All right, today we're diving into a pretty big idea, a thesis that argues something huge is on the horizon. And we're not just talking about a market correction, but a fundamental reset of our entire financial system. So let's get into what that really means.
This right here, this is the core idea we're unpacking. The source material makes a really bold claim. Whatever's coming next, it's not going to look like 2008. But why? Well, see, last time it was a problem in one specific market. This time the argument is that the problem is with the money itself, the very bedrock of the entire global system.
So to really get a grip on what's being predicted, we first have to talk about what it's not. Let's break down exactly why this isn't just a simple repeat of the last big crash we all remember. And this slide just lays it out perfectly. In 2008, the problem was the housing market. A massive bubble for sure, but it was contained within a specific asset class. The argument today, though, is that the bubble isn't just in one part of the economy, it's in the entire currency system itself, the very money that underpins everything. That's a whole different ballgame.
And that's what brings us to this idea of the everything bubble. If the problem really is the currency, then it touches every single part of the economy. There's really no corner to hide in if the money itself is the issue.
So, what does this everything bubble actually look like? Well, according to this analysis, it's standing on four pretty wobbly pillars. First up, you've got debt. We're talking record-shattering levels of it all over the world. Second, liabilities. Trillions and trillions in promises, like pensions, that there's just no money to pay for. Third, devaluation, which happens when governments print money to try and plug those holes. And finally, you have the crushing interest payments on all that debt, which are becoming totally unsustainable.
And this leads us to the heart of the dilemma. The very institutions we count on to fix these kinds of problems, governments and central banks, they are completely and utterly trapped. And it's a trap of their own making, with no easy way out.
This really shows you the pickle they're in. It's a classic lose-lose. Option 1, they raise interest rates to fight off inflation. But if they do that, the massive pile of debt becomes impossible to pay back and the whole system could just break. Option 2, they cut rates to save the economy, but that just pours fuel on the fire of inflation, destroying people's savings. See? Trapped.
Now, the argument here isn't just, hey, a crash is coming. It gets way more specific. It points to a particular time frame where a whole bunch of different forces are all set to collide, creating what could be a true turning point for a generation. So let's look at what's pushing us toward that window. Think of it like 5 huge storm fronts all smashing together at once. You've got economic growth slowing way down right as debt costs are going up. At the same time, trust in traditional government-issued money is falling. Then you throw in messy geopolitics, which are fracturing the global system, and all of this is happening while the central banks are stuck in that policy trap we just talked about. It's a perfect storm. And, if you look at history, this kind of thing isn't random at all. These major shifts in how global money works, they tend to happen in these long cycles, about every 40 to 80 years. The argument is that we are right at the very end of the current one, with a major reset due right around that 2026 to 2027 window.
Okay, so if this crash isn't going to be like 2008, what does it look like? The source outlines a very different kind of crisis. It's one that looks less like a sudden explosion and more like a slow erosion that suddenly gives way.
The first and most fundamental thing that gets hit? Your money. As governments are basically forced to print more and more just to pay their bills, the value of that currency, your purchasing power, just steadily goes down. And here's a huge difference from '08. Back then, it was all about mortgages. This time, the theory goes, the bullseye is on the bond market. Government bonds are supposed to be the safest asset on earth, but in this kind of crisis, they could become the most dangerous. So you've got currencies weakening, bonds in trouble, and what happens next is maybe the most important part, trust. The trust that people have in the entire traditional financial system that's built on top of those things, it just starts to evaporate. And that's the final and most damaging phase. And here's the kicker. Because this crisis won't look like the last one, most people who are following the old playbook, they just won't see it coming. It's like they're watching the windows for a burglar while the entire foundation of the house is quietly crumbling away beneath them. Okay, so after painting that pretty intense picture, the whole argument pivots. Because it's not really about predicting doom and gloom. It's about understanding a massive shift so you can actually prepare for it. So, where are strategic investors looking? This is the key question, isn't it?
If the traditional safe spots like cash and government bonds are suddenly the risky ones, where do you even go? The logic totally flips. It's not about chasing high returns inside the system anymore. It's about preserving your wealth outside of the system's biggest vulnerabilities.
And this is where that strategy takes shape. The focus shifts away from paper assets and toward real, tangible things. We're talking about hard assets you can actually touch. Sound money, like Bitcoin and gold, that isn't controlled by any central bank. The companies that produce essential stuff, commodities, energy, defense. Businesses with really strong, resilient cash flow. And finally, looking toward countries that aren't drowning in debt.
And it's really important to get the mindset here. The source frames this not as a fearful, panicked reaction, but as a logical, calculated strategy. It's about seeing that the landscape is changing and positioning yourself for it, just like you would for any other major economic shift.
And we'll leave you with this final idea. While these kinds of systemic resets are definitely disruptive and can be chaotic, they are also moments of incredible opportunity. According to this view, wealth doesn't just get destroyed in these moments, it gets transferred. And the question this leaves us with is, will people be positioned for the risk or for the reset?